Hello, Western Civilization 105 class. Um, so I want to apologize. I got it's a little stuffy nose, but um, I think I'm pretty much getting through it. My household has had the colds going around, so that's kind of got me backed up a little bit with work last week, and we're still kind of like getting through this week. So I apologize for being a little bit behind on the work due to that. Everybody do your best to stay healthy and take care of yourselves. Communicate with me if you get a little bit behind, if you're having the same kind of issues. So just really quick, what I want to do is just want to talk about some of our work that we've been doing and where we're going, and then just also put it in the middle of thinking about, again, what's going on politically, helping us to just think about what we're learning in history. So I just also want to revisit again some of the papers, which I have the essays I haven't been able to get all graded yet. I'm hoping to today on the ideologies that you covered. So um, I think that for the most part, you all did a great job. It's very challenging, and I just want to clarify some things about what you did and learned in that research and how to continue to be able to apply it to the history that we are learning. And there's some things that I'm going to repeat that I said, but I just want to kind of clarify looking at your assignment there. So when we talk about in history, covering the idea of something. Okay, so actually let me back up for a second. So I've had some friends in college that were political science majors and philosophy majors, and sometimes you get a historian in a room, a political science major, and a philosopher, and a lot of times, especially the philosophers, will get mad at the history folks because when we're under certain debates, when we talk about like ideology, so let's just take Karl Marx. We could take, Karl Marx is the best example, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him. So, philosopher just wants to know, what can we learn by gleaning from the text? That's the main thing that's important, right? The text itself. And that is Marxism, okay? They'll kind of frame it that way. What is Marxism? We're going to explain what the text itself is really arguing. The political scientist will pretty much do the same thing, but I would argue, now look at, some might say this is unfair, but I would say as a general rule, kind of almost like a textbook definition. We're not going to get too heavy into it, but we want to define, Marxism in this way. And historians are not, it's not mutually exclusive, like any of these approaches are in of themselves like wrong. Of course, we just did that. Let's get the definitions that we have down. But ultimately, what we're trying to do in history is see how these ideologies actually translate into the history that you study. And sometimes there is quite a gap between what you read and what you see, right? So I think I may have talked about it a little bit, but for example, in China, they define their economy as socialism with Chinese characteristics. And they did that after they basically liberalized their economy in many ways, allowing for capitalism in. Now, for the Chinese, for a defender of the Chinese government and one that really takes a serious look into their texts, they're going to say China absolutely is still committed to all of the principles of Marxism, but there has been some temporary revisions and pullbacks, and that we're still committed to socialism, and right now we have to change certain things, and it's socialism with Chinese characteristics. The cynic would say, well, that's a poetic way of kind of trying to keep your official ideology while you do something different, right? And so what we often see, though, is that when ideologies are actually put into power, that and power could just simply be that your political party is getting popular, or that the politician is now popular that wasn't before and had made promises under certain ideological um, uh, an umbrella of ideology. So you could be fascist, or it could be communist, it could be any of these ranges of things. And so, a person might say that they're, or a party that's a part of these ideas, and then they have to try to implement them in real life. And sometimes what happens is that things don't go the way that they were planned on, and then they have to kind of, do you rather abandon certain ideologies, or do you rectify them? Do you kind of say, well, I'm holding on to the spirit of what I was into, but now I'm not officially going to be a textbook definition socialist, right? So you would kind of notice this if you look at Western European history, just for example. Officially, Marxism rejects capitalism and has the goal of overthrowing the capitalist world order. The majority of Western Europe's communist parties basically became mainstream left-wing parties. Whatever they're saying on paper, they participated in elections, and they won some and they lost some. They didn't transform their societies, even though they may have been there for a long time, and maybe certain areas they have a lot of influence in maybe certain pockets or towns. So Italy had one of the largest communist parties after World War II, and it didn't, the Communist Party still exists, and Italy's never become communist. And the communists, again, it's more or less in mainstream politics. And so, and then you could take like Zionism, for example. I gave some examples, and of some of the early founders, and there's ideas that come out of the 19th century. But ultimately, if you ask somebody who claims that they're a Zionist, they're most likely to tell you several different things that maybe don't correlate with another person who claims to be that way. So what we have to do when we're studying history, and this is what I'm trying to really focus on right now, is not how much we love or hate or think about the ideologies, or even being cynical about states or people, but to remind ourselves that the definitions that the political scientist was into, and the way that people, focus strictly on the debates like philosophers do, what we're wanting to do in history is kind of see how these things actually operated historically. And, we can sometimes ask questions like, well, Nietzsche, another philosopher, wrote all this negative stuff about women, and the historian notices that his lady life was not going well. And we ask ourselves that maybe was the fact that he didn't have a very fulfilling love life, could that have affected the way his view of women were, or something like that? That's not the kind of question that usually philosophers go into, because they don't historicize, I guess you would say, like the text in that way. And so, we're approaching it just slightly differently. And I like this approach. So I don't reject the political science or the philosophical approach at all, entirely. But I think it's fair to always say, that we're looking at the backgrounds of things, the context, and then how it actually plays out in history. So what I want you to do is just think about that after reflecting on what we learned in that assignment. The next assignment here on Russia in World War I and the creating of the Soviet Union, kind of just reflect also on that too, with the things that you learn from this, and as we move into the Cold War especially, but just on this assignment, I want you to kind of look at and think about those ideas that you officially learned, and then how they were translating into this time period. And then the last thing I'll just say is this. It's interesting that as of today, we could find out that New York will have its first Muslim mayor, but also one that claims to be a democratic socialist. And Mamdani, who is, at the very least, if he doesn't win, he will almost win. Or he will barely lose, let's put it that way. He's become very popular, and this is just like with Bernie Sanders. He's collaborated a lot with Bernie Sanders as another one who claims to be a democratic socialist. Now, keep in mind that Bernie Sanders was a democratic socialist when he was mayor of Vermont, and he didn't overthrow the police department, capitalism. He really didn't radically transform. He did do certain policy changes that many people thought were great, and others, some people, if you're more conservative economically, maybe you thought that was wasteful spending, maybe, or who knows. But nothing radical, right? But right now, you see President Trump says, when he was just interviewed, and they said, well, what do you think about this, democratic socialist? He goes, no, not a democratic socialist, a communist, and worse. And so that's how he's being portrayed by our current president. And President Trump saying that maybe he won't send any federal money to New York because how could he do that being ran by a communist? So he is choosing to redefine somebody who is calling themselves a democratic socialist and saying, no, you're a communist. And this kind of language and this kind of debate is still with us. So you would think after the fall of the Soviet Union, China has mainly transformed its economy to, at least in the meantime, pretty friendly to global free markets. And yet, somebody who does not even identify as a communist is labeled one, and that has been taken very serious by a lot of people in different political spheres and so on. So just think about, the history you're learning, and think about how this language is still being used now. And, I'll let you decide whether you agree or disagree with all that. But anyways, I hope you found this interesting, helpful, and I plan on doing Zoom office hours this week unless I get something worse, from the cold, the regions of winter coming sickness. But like I said, take care of yourselves, be healthy, and we'll be in touch.